Again, today you need a graphing calculator to be able to graph these quadratic equations. We are looking at our notes handout. The first example on your notes handout is we want to solve this. We want to know, well, what is x? Well, we know what x is, don't we? How could you solve this equation? We've done this.
Because
we can do this. How do we get rid of the square? Huh? How do we get... No, divide. How do we get rid of the square? We've done this. We did it just now. Take the square root of both sides. Do this with me, please. So x is equal to what? Well, what is the square root of 16?
4.
4. What's the other answer?
-4.
Negative 4. We could solve some of these by hand. Sometimes it's not going to be that easy. We can solve some of these by hand. Another option to do this is to graph it. Now, in order to graph this quadratic equation, we're going to have to take our equation and make it equal 0. What can we do to this equation to make it equal 0? Subtract 16. So start with that. Please do this with me. So we're left with x squared minus 16 equals 0. At this point, we're going to take our equation and put it into our calculator to see exactly what the graph is. So on your graphing calculator, you need to go to y equals. Y equals is along the top, the very top row. It's this button right here. Now, your screen may look slightly different than mine, but it should be similar. Figure out what's in here. Now, where it has y sub 1, that just means enter your first equation here. The equal sign is already there. You should have that as well. We're going to type in x squared minus 16. Now, let's talk about where these buttons are. You need to click the x button, which is right here beside the green button. Do you see that? I think it says x and
XT,
theta
with a
in.
line through it.
Yeah, theta is a 0 with a little slash. So click that button and it should bring x. You have x up there. Now we want squared. Could use your caret key or not that one. I clicked the wrong one. Well, it's left with negative, didn't it? Sorry about that. Okay. So the square key is right beside the comma. If you would click that, you have x squared on yours.
Oh.
Okay, stop me if you don't. And then hit minus 16. Another side done. Alright, to see a picture of your graph, you're going to click the graph button, which is in the top row again, on the far right hand side. Click graph. Let's see what I graph, just to make sure we were able to get to it. That's other stuff in yours. Maybe somebody that's been silly. Let's go to zoom. And then number 6. See you standing. Enter. issue with your graph appearing. It looks funny. There's a button you can go to kind of bring it back to, I guess you would call it our home screen. Do this with me just in case you get to this and you panic and you don't know what to do. Go to Zoom. You see Zoom on the top row? Click Zoom. And then number 6, it says Z standard. That means Zoom standard. That gives us to a 10 by 10 viewing window. I think there's somebody here I had to adjust. But if it ever happens and your screen doesn't look right, go to Zoom and Zoom standard number 6. I can just hit 6. And it should give me a 10 by 10 viewing window. Now, all right, let's talk about this graph. What is the point of graphing this? Well, your solutions on this graph are where your graph crossed the x-axis. Well, what point do they cross the x-axis at? Look at your graph. Here we're crossing at what? 4. Here we're crossing at? -4. Isn't that what we found when we solved it? 4 and -4. So what I want you to do on your paper that you have an x-y axis here. A real nice, neat one drawn in. I want you to sketch a graph. Please do this with me. Sketch your graph. We know that our graph crossed here. We know that it crossed at 4 and it crossed at -4. Okay, so put dots there and then draw in. This is what we call a parabola. We'll talk more about these parabolas. But your solutions are where this graph is crossing that x-axis. We were able to find the solutions by solving it algebraically, by taking the square root of both sides. We were also able to solve by graphing. And like I said, you'll have access to these calculators. They're going to be there for you when you take your EOC. Let's look at example B. Example B, which is the next problem on your sheet. If we have a quadratic equation that looks like this, what's one way that we talked about solving this? We don't have a greatest common factor. Box method. Let's do this real quick. Set up your box. What's going to go in the top left-hand corner?
A squared.
A squared. What's going to go down here in the bottom right?
-28.
You're looking at C.
Oh, whoops.
24. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 24 and add to give me 10. What are those two numbers? Write this down, guys. You should be doing this with me. What are those two numbers that multiply to 24 and add to 10? 4 and 6. So factor each row and column. In the first column we have A. Second column 6. First row A. Second row 4. I'm doing this quickly because you guys should be able to factor at this point. So our factor form would be A plus 6, A plus 4 equals 0. Now solve. Set each factor equal to 0. A plus 6 equals 0, and A plus 4 equals 0. And subtract 6, so A is equal to -6. There we can subtract 4. A is equal to -4. I have two answers, right? -4 and -6. What I want to do next is let's graph it to be sure that these really are my answers. Let's check to make sure. So go to your graphing calculator, please, and please do this with me. This is new. I want you to go through as many examples as we can. Where are we going to go to see to type in our equation? Where did we go? Y equals. So go ahead and click that top row. Please do this with me on your calculators, guys. Top row, left-hand button. Clear out anything that's in there. Now this equation uses the variable a, right? Are we okay if we just use x instead of a? Because we know right where that x button is, and it makes it a lot easier to do. So I'm going to use x instead of a, but it's the same thing. So we're going to type in x, remember x is beside the green button. So x squared plus 10x plus 24.
And you want to put in the equal 0 part?
No, because the equals is already in there for you. We don't need the equal 0. So where are we going to go to see the picture of our graph?
Graph.
Like graph. Do we in fact have, we call those zeros, do we have solutions or do we have zeros at -4 and -6? Yes, isn't that what we found when we did it by hand? When we factored? We have solutions at -4 and -6. That's what we mean by solutions. Solutions are where we call those zeros, where your graph crosses that x-axis. Well, our graph is crossing here at -4 and -6. So what I want you to do on your grid, you have an x-y axis. We have zeros at -4 and -6. So I want you to draw in a parabola that has zeros at -4 and -6. Please do this on your paper. It's not going to be perfect. It's just going to be a sketch at this point. Let's go to example C. What factoring method might you use on example C? The box. Let's set up the box. N squared and -28. What are two numbers that multiply to -28 and add to -3? Okay, so you participate. What two numbers multiply to -28 and add to -3?
4 times -7.
4 and -7. So factor each row in column. So you put it in there. And then 4, here we have n and -7. So our factored form would be n plus 4 and -7 equals 0. Let's set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So we should have n as -4 and n as +7. So when we graph this, we should have zeros at -4 and 7, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Let's graph it and see if we do in fact have zeros here. So go to y equals and clear out anything that's currently there. Again, this time we're using the variable n. Let's go ahead and just use x to keep it uniform. So we have x to the second power squared minus 3x minus 28. Where are we going to go to see the picture? Please do this, guys, on your calculators. Where are you going to go to see the picture? Graph. We found when we did it algebraically that we had solutions at -4 and 7. Is that the case here? Do we have solutions at -4 and 7? We do. So on your xy axis, I want you to graph this. -4 and 7. I'm just sketching a graph. It's not going to be perfect. Now, example D, we're not actually going to go ahead and factor it. We could, but we're running out of time here, and I want to make sure that we're able to use the graphing calculators. So look at a D with me. I can't type this into the calculator as it is, can I? What do I need to do to make it so I can type it in? Okay, we could subtract 4x squared. What's another option? That's what I would do. I would leave your quadratic term positive. We call this term here the 4x squared. We call that the quadratic term. Leave it positive. So I'm going to subtract x. So 4x squared minus x equals 3. And then I'm going to subtract 3 as well. 4x squared minus x minus 3 equals 0. It's going to give you the same zeros if you had done it the other way, if you had subtracted your 4x squared. It would just make your parabola upside down. So let's go to your graphing calculator and type this in. Go to y equals and clear out your graph that's already there. Your equation, excuse me, that's there.
So we don't have to do the box method anymore?
Well, right now I was just making that comparison. That's all.
So we get the same answer as earlier.
Right, you should get the same answer as with graphing. Uh-oh. What's wrong?
He was asking the same question I was.
Hang on, I have a calculator malfunction. I think it's locked up on me. Let's take another approach here. I'll have to restart my computer. We'll make it work. Alright, so I'm going to have to use this calculator. The other one is not working. So go to y equals again, and we're going to type it in as 4x squared. And then we're going to do minus x and minus 3. So go to graph. Where does it look like we have solutions here?
1 and 1.
One looks like 1 and like quite at -1. It looks like it's close, doesn't it? Maybe we're not real sure and we need to get a more exact answer. There is a zoom button. Utilize it. Do you see zoom right here on the top? Click zoom if you would. We need number 2. We need to zoom in. So I'm going to hit 2. Now it didn't do anything, did it? Hit enter.
Ooh.
And it zoomed in for you.
Weird.
So now we can clearly see that it crossed at 1, right? And there is, if you have a little blinker, it's not really blinking, I guess it kind of is blinking barely. Do you see it? I'm using my arrow. I can move that over until I get right there. I've moved my little blinker until it's right there along that x-intercept, which would be at about 1. You can see the ordered pair at the bottom, 1.0 and 0. And if you wanted to move your little blinker over to the other side, so I'm talking about the little blinker, guys. Little bladder. If we move him over there, it's not quite at -1, is it? So we couldn't say our solution's at -1. It would be about -7.4 and +1. -0.75 or -3/4 is probably what it is. So when we go to graph this on your handout, we have solutions 2 places. We had +1 and we had about -3/4-ish. We draw in our parabola. It's going to look like that. Flip over to the back side real quick, please. We have 2 more examples to get through. This next example, letter E, already equals 0, correct? So there's no solving to be done. We can go ahead and type it in. So I'm going to go back to y equals and type in this equation. I have x squared plus 2. Where are we going to go to see the picture of our graph? Graph. Now I didn't change my viewing window back, did I? Do you remember how to do that? If I told you want to get to, if your screen doesn't look right, I told you what to do. Do you remember? Good. Go to zoom, and then we want number 6, Z standard, zoom standard. So I'm just going to hit 6. And that time it took me back. Now what about this one? Where does this cross the x-axis? It doesn't. We don't have any solutions. Remember when we did problems like this earlier? We would subtract 2 to solve. So x squared equals -2. And then we take the square root of both sides. Well, what is the square root of -2? We said it's no solution, didn't we?
Like 1.4.
That's square root of 2, not -2.
-1.
Be careful. I can't square anything to give me -2, can I?
That's right.
So we said here it was no solution. And look at your graph. That holds true, doesn't it? This graph never crosses. Never crosses your x-axis, so we don't have any solutions. Your solutions are where it crosses your x-axis. It really doesn't matter that it crosses your y-axis. That's not a solution. Your solutions are where it crosses the x-axis.
So if it doesn't go through the x-axis, then it's not a solution.
That's right. Letter F, real quick. Let's graph this one. But y equals, we have x squared. That's all we can type in. The graph. What about this one? What's its solution?
Let's do 0.
0. Okay. And if we had solved this one like we did previously, we would have x equals 0. There's really not a plus and minus 0, is there? It's not a positive 0 and a negative 0. So our graph would just look like that. And I skipped over the graph on E, but we can definitely draw that in. Shifted 2 units up. So these calculators do a lot of stuff for you, don't they?
Yes, they do.
A lot of stuff. You utilize them. They are your friend. They are there to help you. We're going to practice some graphing, guys. You cannot take these calculators home. You are welcome to utilize them during class or an advisory. If you want to borrow them in another hour and bring them back, you can do that. But you can't take them home. They do need to be returned before school is out. I do have some problems that you're going to graph to solve. Huh? Yes, I recorded. Thank you. Now you're really only going to need the graphing calculator for problems 1 through 6. And you have plenty of time right now. You can get 1 through 6 done. The others, you will not need a calculator. Problem number 16. You can omit. Problem 16 you can omit. We'll talk about that one, but just not yet. We haven't talked about exponentials just yet. Just to clarify, part 1, it says for each quadratic equation, circle all the x values, which are solutions. You may have several answers or you may have none for a particular problem. I want you to utilize that graphing calculator here on 1 through 6 to solve.
See if we can have 2 answers on it.
We sure could. We might just have one. It just depends. On number 6, based on part 1, you can answer those questions. Part 2, we don't need a calculator for that. On the back side, real quick, 8 through 13, you don't need a graphing calculator there. I'm giving you the graphs. You're just identifying the solutions. And then you can compare, you can do 14 and 15. Okay. So we're doing 1 through 15.